I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to ask you to join me on the next Legal Lines. We're going to be speaking with Stephen McCollister. He is a real estate attorney, and we're going to talk about something hopefully everybody does, and that is buy a home. What do you have to do when you decide that you want to buy a home? What is the process like? What are the pitfalls that you have to avoid? And we're also going to talk about a thing called a 1031 exchange, which helps you eliminate having to pay taxes on any profits you might get when you sell the property. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Stephen McCollister. Thank you.
Let's say there's a problem with your satellite TV. Who would you call? The clerk at the store? That lady who activated the service? Or maybe the neighbor who helped install it? Confusing, huh? It's just another reason why I'm sticking with Cox. With Cox, getting great service is easy. One call and help is there. We're talking real experts with real answers, and right in my neighborhood, too. Don't get stuck with satellite.
Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. I'm pleased to have on the show today Stephen McCollister. Stephen's been practicing 21 years and handles a ton of real estate transactions. Stephen, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Locke. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this because basically everybody wants to own a home, or they're going to buy a home, or they're refinancing. They're just, bottom line is, this is an area of law that people deal with on a regular basis, and you do it every day. And so I want to talk to you about that. Educate folks. What do they run into when they decide they want to buy a house?
Well, first, let me say I've been practicing, like you said, 21 years. The first part of my practice, I started with Aubrey McClary and my father, Rolfe McCollister, and for 13 years did mostly residential. The last 8 years, I've done more commercial, but still do a fair amount of residential. And on the residential side, most people, a lot of times buying their home, that's the only attorney that they come into contact with in certain instances.
If they're lucky, huh?
Yeah, really. But on the buying a home, obviously the first step is to decide, what location they want. Most people choose to hire a realtor. Generally, the way that works is the seller that lists a home usually lists it with the realtor. So on a buyer's side, if you have a realtor that's working for you, the seller normally pays a commission. So you're not paying for that, but you have the benefit of the realtor helping you run numbers and find houses throughout the Baton Rouge area or whatever area you're looking area. Yeah, where it's
and the realtor are the ones who stick the sign in the front yard, and you call that phone number, and they're kind of fielding the phone calls on a house that they've got listed.
And they have a ton of resources, that they can access that most individuals, other than looking in the paper or driving around, don't have.
They have the MLS book,
the MLS listing
service, and that has basically every single house or piece of property that's for sale in this area that's listed by a real estate agent.
That's correct. And then once you decide, hey, I want a house in this price range or this area, then you need to, you set up to go inspect it and look at it. And if you're interested, step one is to sign a purchase agreement. If you like the house and decide what you want to offer for it, you'll have a written agreement called a purchase agreement. The Board of Realtors has their standard form they use with the realtors. Other attorneys, we have general purchase agreement forms that you can use.
Not quite identical, but...
Yeah, right. But basically it sets up the price and the terms.
And let's talk about that.
Go ahead, sure.
Basically, that's the purchase agreement is the document that, let's say we're going out and we want to find a house, and we see a house, we go look at it, we call the real estate lady, they show it to us, we like it, we want to make an offer. Now, of course, the real estate agent tells us they want $500,000 for it, and there's no way we want to give them 100 or whatever. And it's the beginning of the negotiating process.
That's right. You would just fill out the purchase agreement, put your price down that you want to offer, put your other terms, such as, is it going to be contingent on financing? Most people have to get a bank loan or a loan through a mortgage company.
Meaning, even if you accept this loan, this offer to buy your house, folks, it's conditioned on me going to the bank and giving them all the documents I need to, and them agreeing to pay, help me buy this thing, loan me the money so I can pay you.
Right, and if the mortgage company or bank, turns you down, then that would, in effect, terminate the agreement, and you would get your deposit back and move on.
So you're not on the hook.
Right. Now, on the seller side, they want you to, put certain time periods for you to, within 3 or 5 days, go make formal loan application with the lender, and then sometimes, give them proof that you've qualified so that they know they haven't, in effect, taken their property off the market for too long.
And then you don't want to leave your offer open for a huge, long period of time, because other people can be submitting offers, and they might be better than yours. In other words, you want to kind of keep it on the front burner for everybody and try and get decisions taking place. Another interesting side is we're talking about contingent on bank financing, but there are also offers made on homes where there's what's called owner financing. Tell the folks about that.
Well, some sellers, if they either own their home outright or have a small mortgage, they may be willing to, or the buyer may make the offer for the seller to, in effect, carry the note and act like the bank. And then the seller would be the mortgage holder, and you would pay the seller each month. But
so the offer would be, I want to buy your house for $200,000. I'll give you $50,000 down, and you owner finance the other $150,000, and come up with the terms and treat them like the bank.
Yeah, and that usually doesn't happen too much, just because most people don't own their property outright and can't afford to carry that. But some do, and that, in certain instances that works out well, because some people, if they do own it, the sellers have owned it for a long time, they may not want to pay taxes on the whole amount. If it's on homes, there's certain exemptions from taxes, but on certain other real estate properties, they may prefer to get a long-term note and get the 6 or 8% return on the interest versus a lump sum.
What about what are other conditions that you typically see in purchase agreements?
Well, most purchase agreements have an inspection period, and that allows your buyer, 10 days, 15 days to go in and get either a professional inspector or someone they know to check out the different parts of the house, the roof, the air conditioning units, the other things. And usually the way it's worded is you make a list of the deficiencies that you want repaired, and then the seller either can choose to repair them or make a concession or elect not to do it, and then either terminate the agreement or you have to accept it as is. And on the seller side, sometimes if they do make that, they will want to put an as-is clause in the sale and the purchase agreement.
Which means what?
Which means you have the opportunity to do your inspections, and we'll address anything up front, but at the act of sale, once you buy it, it becomes your responsibility. So if a week later you find something that was hidden, a hidden defect, or a foundation problem or a roof problem, you can't come back to me. You bought that. Louisiana law generally allows a 1-year period to make claims, which are fairly rare, but the as-is condition, if you waive all those warranties, then the buyer has to do a good job up front on inspections.
And you've brought up warranties. I know over the last few years I've seen on some of the real estate signs, warranty provided, where basically you buy insurance, as I understand it. Explain that.
Yeah, they do have companies that will provide, usually that's referring to a 1-year warranty on all your appliances and systems. So if your air conditioning system goes out or your dishwasher, usually between maybe $350 to $500, you can buy that. And sometimes the seller will pay for that, and that gives the during the comfort that, hey, if during the next year something goes out, I'll be able to replace it, for either a small deductible, usually $50, something like that.
All right, let's say you've got a house for sale. I've made you an offer via purchase agreement. We've negotiated the terms, the conditions. I sign it, you sign it. What's the next step?
Well, usually you go through the buyer goes and makes application for the loan approval, goes ahead and with the bank, does the inspection, make sure that any repairs or issues are addressed. Also, one of the items in the purchase agreement, you want to spell out and be as detailed as possible to avoid any misunderstanding about what stays and what goes.
That's an important issue, isn't it?
You've got draperies, and certain things are kind of built in, but some sellers think if I can pull it off the wall, I'm taking it.
Right, a freestanding fireplace. If
a buyer sees a mirror hanging there or a chandelier, there are things so it's better to be clear on what's supposed to stay and what goes. But once you do get the bank approval and you get the inspections done, and like I said, with realtors, they normally walk you through that and help you do that and get all that straight. Then the realtor or the buyer or seller sends the purchase agreement, contacts the attorney,
and that's
to
where
set
you
up the
guys start
closing.
getting
Right.
involved.
That's usually the first step is for us. We will get a copy of the purchase agreement to open the file and get the process open.
All right, let's talk about that on our next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and Steve McCollister. We'll be right back.
Television has evolved to the sensational. Cox Digital Cable is high touch with an interactive program guide anyone can use. Cox Digital is tasteful with sophisticated programming choices that stimulate, educate, and make you feel great. Cox Digital is sight and sound extraordinaire, especially on an HD set. Eye-popping clarity and 5.1 surround sound. Cox Digital lets you smell. Well, we're working on it. Experience the digital evolution with Cox Digital Cable, television for the senses.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, pleased to have on the show Stephen McCollister. He's a real estate attorney here in Baton Rouge, and we're talking about buying a house. Stephen, we were talking about the purchase agreement and the various conditions you put in it, inspections and such. You also mentioned the termite certificate. Let's talk about that.
Well, in my experience, a clear termite certificate is important, and sometimes you get to the closing table and they've either found termites or found damage, and that's kind of one of the issues that
So it slows
really
it
needs to be
down?
resolved. So I would recommend people get the termite inspection done early enough so that if there's treatment to be done or any damage to be checked out, that can be addressed prior to the closing date.
All right, so let's say I've made a purchase, sent a purchase agreement to you, I've signed it, you sign it, we've gone through the inspections, termite certificate's been received, all that. It's time to get the lawyer involved. Take me through that process.
Well, we would get a copy of the purchase agreement and talk to the buyer and seller and the realtors, and then we'd also talk to the lender because they're loaning the money. They're kind of driving the closing.
If you don't have them, you don't have a sale,
Right.
do you?
In some instances, you do have cash sales, which are simpler, but we don't see those as much. But usually with the lender or the bank, we'll contact them, and they'll send us a list of closing instructions and tell us how to proceed.
Now imagine they've already received all of the documentation from the buyer that supports the loan. They've made the decision that they're going to loan the money. The question is now, what do you have to do to satisfy them that when they loan the money, they're properly secured?
Right, and they're looking to us to, usually they require what's called a title insurance commitment. We have to order an abstract of title and do a search of the title. In Louisiana, only attorneys can examine title.
All right, so let's explain to the folks what that is, examining the title. What we're talking about is the record of ownership of that particular piece of property and house.
Right, in each courthouse, the clerk of court in each parish has a index, conveyance, and mortgages. So you have every act of sale or conveyance, every mortgage or lien that would be against the property.
So we have indexes that deal with, or records that deal with ownership and whether or not there's any kind of lien or loan against that ownership.
Right, in most cases, people buy in subdivisions. So you would go way back to before the subdivision was developed and run it forward and see each act of sale or transfer and see what liens or mortgages. And we have to make sure there are no judgments against individuals. As attorneys, obviously, a lot of attorneys, we're out there, in litigation, and we may get a money judgment against someone. If you record that in the mortgage records, that acts as a lien or mortgage. So if we pick up any of those judgments or liens, they have to be settled or released before we can do the transfer.
What you do then is you make sure that the person who says, I can sell you this house, really can sell you the house, that they own it, and number two, that there's not some kind of lien or judgment or mortgage against it that needs to be dealt with so that they can convey clear title.
Exactly. The mortgage, usually most people do have a mortgage, but obviously we get a payoff statement, and at the closing we take the sale proceeds and deduct from the seller's portion necessary to pay their mortgage so that they can convey clear title.
You're really dealing with two banks, the bank of the person who wants to buy the home, and then the bank of the person who wants to sell the home.
That's right. And on the buyer side, like I said, we do the act of sale and put the mortgage in place, and we have to ensure to the lender that that mortgage is in first position and they have a valid mortgage and the buyer owns it. But Louisiana is a community property state, so generally the husband and wife both have to sign the mortgage and encumber the property unless you have a marriage contract or something like that. But generally, both the husband and wife on the selling side and the buying side have to participate in the process.
So when somebody buys the house, and most everybody understands this, when they borrow the money, what the bank does is says, we're going to give you this money to buy that house, but we're going to have you pledge as security or mortgage as security that house you're buying. So if you don't pay this note, we can ultimately seize that house and sell it and get whatever proceeds from the sale and apply it towards your loan. And
That's
you guys
right.
are hired to make sure that that's possible if for some reason a purchaser isn't able to pay for the house.
In the end, the buyers, you sign a promissory note, so you are personally liable, but it's secured or collateralized by the mortgage and the house, so they could in fact seize the house if it came to that. Now, we issue title insurance to the bank to protect them, so if for some reason they find out down the road, hey, there was a lien or other mortgage superior to ours, the title company would settle that.
And when you call it title insurance, what you're saying is, bank, we're certifying that, and we got insurance in case we make a mistake. We're telling you, you're the first person in line that can seize this property and sell it and get the money.
Yeah, and you also have what's called owner's title insurance. And when I first started practicing in the early 80s in the real estate area, because attorneys did the closings, the owner's title insurance, was not a, most people elected not to.
Tell me what that is.
Well, the owner's title insurance protects the owner that they do have a valid ownership for the investment that they're putting forward. Now, the lender has their policy, but once you pay them off, that terminates.
They don't care.
But your owner's policy continues and protects the owner, so if they go to sell it 5, 10, 15 years from now, their investment is also protected. And if you buy the owner's policy, which is optional, but by law we have to disclose it at the closing, and more people now are choosing to get the owner's title insurance.
I was going to ask you, what do you recommend, Steve?
Normally I always recommend it in the mid to late 80s and early 90s when there were a lot of foreclosures. They started finding title issues that most people didn't anticipate, and so the shift in thinking changed. Plus your title insurance, we examine what's on the public record, but as the attorneys, we're not responsible if there's a forgery in the chain of title, if there's in a succession, if they list 3 children and there's a missing heir or a 4th child.
Really?
There are other issues outside of what the attorney's duties are that would, title insurance protects you. And they even now have expanded protection on the owner's side that gives you protection for survey encroachments, violations of subdivision restrictions.
What's the cost for that insurance?
It's the state Louisiana Insurance Commission sets it by the amount. Say on a $100,000 house, it's roughly in the $400, $450 range. But if you're already having to get your mortgage policy, you may already be paying $250 or $300 for, say, an $80,000 loan. So you only pay the difference.
Now let's
a lot of times that's a good investment for people.
Let's talk about scenarios where we used to have the retribution lawsuit a lot, where somebody would buy a house and you couldn't discover that there was a foundation crack, and then they pull up the carpet and there it is, and now they're filing a suit. Do we still have that in Louisiana?
Right, the retribution law is still in effect. The as-is clause and waiver of warranty clause that you now see in a lot of purchase agreements waives those rights.
Okay.
So that puts the burden on the buyer prior to closing the act of sale to make sure they do a very, very thorough inspection to
And that's
protect
the reason
themselves.
for the inspection, because the inspection basically would identify any obvious defects because that's a defense to a lawsuit in retribution. If you'd done an inspection, you could have seen it, so it's not our problem. The retribution lawsuit is only when it's a defect that you couldn't discover from a reasonable inspection.
That's right. But in most cases, under the as-is or waiver of warranty, there are a few things that are exceptions, but generally those rights would be waived.
And I assume that's a customary clause now.
Yeah, every seller I advise, I tell them to put that in there. On the buyer side, you just need to make sure you do your job up front.
Okay.
Exactly.
What we're going to talk about on the next segment will be the commercial real estate side of it, 1031 exchanges. It's Locke Meredith with Legal Lines and Stephen McCollister. We'll be right back.
Cox Communications is homegrown with local programming for you. Whether it's local sports, local arts and education, local news and weather, local faith and worship, or local stations with the best in entertainment, Cox Communications brings it all home to you. It's homegrown programming with roots. Only on cable. Only on Cox.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I have on the show today Stephen McCollister. We're talking about real estate, buying a house, and what you need to do when you do that, what factors you need to consider. And we're also going to talk about commercial real estate. Stephen, one last thing about buying a house that's important is where it's located in terms of the flood zone.
Yeah, a good part of our area, you do have flood areas that you need flood insurance, so that's just one of the items you need to check into up front to make sure if you're going to buy that home that you know flood insurance may be required, and that's an extra expense. So
and
you need to factor that in.
When I've bought property there or sold property, there's a form, I believe, that's required by the real estate folks that discloses whether or not the property has ever flooded during their ownership. Is that right?
Right, the seller has to disclose that as to their knowledge, but that does not necessarily mean that it's in a flood zone. So your realtor or you on your own need to check into whether or not that house is located in a flood zone and what the extra cost would be for that.
All right, so if I'm going to buy a piece of property and the seller signs a form that says this house has never flooded while I've owned it, that really doesn't tell me that that house will never flood. That just tells me what it says. It's not saying that the house has never flooded in the past or is not in the 100-year flood zone, correct?
Right, and it's possible it may be that particular house may be built up and so it won't flood, but it's still within a flood area and you may still have to have flood insurance. Usually the higher up it's built, the less costly it is, but you may still have an expense to deal with.
And banks customarily will require you to buy flood insurance if they're financing.
Yeah, they check that. They make you have it, so you would have to get it if it's within a flood zone.
Let's talk about, I bought the house, the bank's giving me the money, you've done your deal, you know, it's all tied up. What do you tell folks when they're leaving about their taxes?
Well, in Louisiana, we have the homestead exemption law, which if you live in your home, the first $75,000 in value is homestead exempt, but you do need to go down to the assessor's office of the parish in which your home is located and sign the form. They'll help you fill it out. Usually bring a copy of your act of sale. But that obviously would save you on a $100,000 home in East Baton Rouge Parish. The taxes would be in the $1,000 to $1,100 range, but with the homestead exemption, it may only be in the $300 range.
Because
so it saves you $700 or $800
a
in
chunk of
taxes.
change. Because
Yes,
basically what it does is, if I paid $100,000 for my house, the homestead exemption says we're not going to make you pay taxes on the first $75,000 of value. So all you're in essence
Right.
paying taxes on is only $25,000. Important thing to do.
Exactly, and then and I usually shake their hand and congratulate them. For most people, buying their home is probably their biggest purchase they'll have. And usually, in my experience, both sides hopefully walk out happy, unlike in other areas of law. But
Yeah,
that's
you're
all
right.
right. So
Both people hopefully are winners, huh?
it's a good area to work in.
Well, let's switch gears.
Okay.
The commercial real estate. What do you customarily see in that realm right now?
Well, real estate has traditionally been a good investment for people, and you know, with the stock market going up and down, or the low returns on your accounts at your bank, you can invest in real estate and get a good return on your money. And so I've seen more and more of my clients, as I've shifted over to the commercial, they're looking at different investments, whether it's office buildings or little apartment complexes, or even some individuals who can't afford the bigger projects, may buy a fourplex, which is 4 units in one area, residential, and lease out the 4 units.
What are you customarily recommending to folks that are looking to do that? I mean, is there any particular pitfalls
Well,
that they need to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, one, getting a good commercial realtor will help you because they're experienced in the area and they can help you run the numbers. I mean, it's key that you analyze what your rents are and what your expenses are, so you can determine, based on what you're going to buy it for and the cost of that, what your rate of return will be. And, certain areas are always stay 100% occupied. If you buy something that goes vacant, then that
You're not gonna make much
be
money,
a bad investment.
What-
Go ahead.
What are you, I know personally you and I have dealt with scenarios where we've done what's called 1031 exchanges. Let's talk about that, because basically when it's all said and done, what that does is eliminates my need to pay taxes on any profit that I made from the sale of a piece of property, which is a big deal.
Well, several of my clients who started, say, 15 years ago buying certain smaller commercial projects, now they're at the point where they're worth a lot more money. And so they get a good offer on it. So they decide, hey, I'm going to sell this office building. Well, they would have to pay, it'd be a huge gain and a potential tax liability that they would prefer to defer.
So let's use an example. Let's say we bought an office building for $200,000 10 years ago, and now it's worth $1 million. So we've made $800,000 when we sell it. Uncle Sam wants his piece, which could be
Right.
$400,000 or $300,000. That's a lot of money. So this is a way that you can potentially not have to pay that, at least at that moment.
Right, and most of my clients, a lot of them use the 1031 exchanges. As their attorney, I don't handle it directly. I coordinate it with the different exchange companies. The different title companies have exchange companies that work with them, and we have a couple in Baton Rouge. Well, what you do is you go find another property that you want to purchase. You go ahead and sell your property, and that profit that you make, you put in escrow.
In this
And then
case,
you
it's
have-
$800,000. You'd put in an escrow account with some title
Yeah, unless,
company.
well, potentially you may, if you had a loan on it, you may still owe $500,000, so you may only end up with part of it. But yet you had the gain on the larger portion, where your exchange company would hold that money, those funds in escrow, and then there's a 45-day identification period where you decide what property you want to purchase
And
to
you can
replace
pick more
it.
than one.
Generally, they let you pick up to 3. You can go more than that. There's certain rules you got to be careful about. But generally, you find the 1 or 2 other properties. If you sold it for $1 million, you have to reinvest at least that or more. So either buy 2 properties at $500,000 each, or 1 property at $1 million or higher. And then you have, within 6 months, you have to acquire that.
So let's
But
summarize.
obviously, by doing that, you get to use those funds, and you've deferred your taxes and moved it into the new investment.
And the reason is because you're exchanging one property, in essence, for another property or 2. And so to summarize, what you do is you sell your property, the profit that you've made on it, you put it in an escrow account with a title company, and then you identify within 45 days other properties that you're going to buy. And you have to buy one of the ones that you identify.
Right.
And then you have 6 months to go ahead and close on any of those, one of those 3 properties or more. And if you do that, you have protected this money that you've earned, this profit that you've made, from being taxed at that time. Now, if you sell those other properties down the road, you'll pay taxes on it at that time.
Or, some of my clients, they've done it 3 or 4 times, so you potentially could do another 1031 down the road.
And there's no restriction on the number of 1031s that you do that you know of, is there?
No. Each investment comes along. And that, for attorneys, I've got clients that deal a lot in real estate, and by them selling and not wanting to pay taxes, that's good business for me, because I'm able to help them sell their one property, and then I get to work with them to purchase their next property.
They actually also have what's called a reverse 1031 exchange, which is kind of backwards of what we've just discussed, isn't it?
That's a little more complicated, and you don't see that too much, but I've worked on a few of those where you actually buy your other property first. And then the property you're trying to sell, if it hadn't sold, you have a certain period of time, you sell it. But to do that, the intermediary actually sets up a separate company to hold it.
Right.
And then eventually transfers it to you.
All right. Stephen, thank you so much for
Okay,
being on
sure.
the show. Appreciate it. This is Locke Meredith
good to be
Legal
here.
Lines.
Thank you.
Stephen McCollister, thank you for being with us.
Monday morning came too soon. It's entering my